All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us either in person this morning or on the video for our 2025 Tucson Bird Count orientation meeting. So I'm going to try to keep this to about an hour to respect everyone's time, but this is going to be a bit of an overview and a how-to and some of the new stuff we're doing for the Tucson Bird Count. This is a really cool count. It's a urban bird count, which is pretty different from many of the other long-running historical counts out there. So things like the Christmas bird count, which has been going for like over 100 years now, which is a really cool project. That one happens in the winter, as you might guess by the name, Christmas bird count. And it also mostly, they tend not to be super urban. Some of those circles include urban habitat. Many of them do, but they're not really focused exclusively on sort of urban. And that's what's going on with the TBC. It's a really interesting count where it was actually just a little bit of backstory. It was founded in 2001. Will Turner, who was a graduate student at the University of Arizona, founded it with his advisor, Mike Rosenzweig, who's still around and has advised on the count for many years and is now an emeritus retired professor with the University of Arizona. So those two started the count way back in 2001 when none of this technology like Zoom or eBird existed. And it's a really well designed count, and we'll talk about that a little bit about how it was designed and why it's so relevant. Um, but I do just want to point out that the count has always had, and I learned this from Mike Rosenzweig when Tucson Audubon Society, now known as Tucson Bird Alliance, took over this count when I became the new coordinator of the count in about 20, I think it was 2012. I took over the count, and it had been run by Will Turner for a few years, and then as a graduate student, and then another graduate student, Rachel McCaffrey, took over the count, and she ran it for years, and I was a participant in the count at that point. And I knew as a participant, because Rachel would communicate this, that after she graduated with her PhD that she got based on the Tucson bird count, that she had moved to New Mexico and was still running the Tucson bird count from her new home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so I knew this as a counter, and I was like, oh, and at that point, then I was working at Tucson Audubon, and I was like, Rachel, maybe Tucson Audubon could take over the count and run it from Tucson, so you're not trying to do this from New Mexico. But it's such an interesting data set and such a long running count that I can see why Rachel was doing that, trying to keep the count going because it's really a very interesting data set. And so I had to meet with Mike Rosenzweig and get permission and all that, and have this whole transfer of permissions and everything that happened. And then I took over the count in 2012, or as a Tucson Audubon project, and it's been running ever since. So this count has happened every single year since 2001. It's a very fascinating data set as a result, um, in the sense that it has been going for many years. And I do want to just talk a little bit about the design of the count. Sorry, I'm adjusting my windows here. I want to talk about the design of the count because it really is such an interesting thing. Um, right here, my Zoom. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And what is this? All right. So some housekeeping first. There has been a change in the Tucson Bird Count website.
We can't see your screen.
Okay, I'm
But
sharing
now
it
we
right
can.
now. Is you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. There has been a change in the website in that when Tucson Audubon became Tucson Bird Alliance this year in 2025, we needed a new web URL. So the Tucson Bird Count website has been tucsonbirds.org for many years, and that is now the Tucson Bird Alliance website. Okay, that URL has been taken over by Tucson Bird Alliance. Below, we do have are you looking for the Tucson Bird Count? Click here. But if you want to go directly to it, this link will take you there right off the homepage of the new Tucson Bird Alliance website. But you can also just do tbc.tucsonbirds.org. That's our new site. I also want to just point out quickly that everything pretty much that I'm going to talk about is given to all counters, new or existing, as written materials. But I think it's really helpful to go over this sort of in person, visually show it to you guys. But this is all submitted. I'll show them. I have a few documents that have historically been part of the count of like directions and that kind of thing. So that stuff does exist in writing, just so you guys know. If anyone out there is sort of furiously taking notes, just this is all in writing, but I think it's a good idea to go over it. So this is its own now subdomain of TucsonBirds.org, but it's kind of its own separate module. It's the tbc.tucsonbirds.org, TBC, of course, being Tucson Bird Count. And it has had its own website for many years, mostly because it's sort of larger than Tucson Bird Alliance or Tucson Audubon. It existed before. It wasn't run by, it was always supported by Tucson Audubon and like partnered with Tucson Audubon. But anyway, so because it predates, it has a history beyond Tucson Audubon. It does have its own site, just so you guys understand that. The homepage just has some kind of fun information about the count. Um, okay. So that's our new home of the same website we've had for years, this Tucson Bird Count website. So it's at tbc.tucsonbirds.org. And I also just want to point out that the Tucson Bird Count has always had a larger purpose. Many counts will sort of just be interested in looking for, trends or something sort of, I don't know, more analytical, but this one always had a conservation focus. This was always a big point of the count is to talk about reconciliation ecology. And what we mean by that is basically, and this is a big influence from Mike Rosenzweig, who was, sort of the professor who helped found the count back in 2001. And I have this great video here that we did with Saguaro National Park that's worth a watch. It's just a few minutes long. It's a fun video, and it has Mike in it talking about the fact that the count always had this purpose of trying to create better bird habitat in an urban setting. So the term was coined, I don't know if it was coined by Mike, but Mike promoted a lot, Professor Rosenzweig, of reconciliation ecology. And it's the sort of concepts from like Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy, where we can make urban habitat better for birds and wildlife and sort of share back with some of the space and kind of give back some of the habitat that was converted into urban habitat. So it has this larger concept, and it was really early in this game of reconciliation ecology was the Tucson Bird Count. So that's why our website has this whole section called Bringing Birds Home, and that's why it's sort of a sub-slogan of the count. And if you've ever seen the recipe cards that we give away a lot at events, that's actually a product of the Tucson Bird Count. And this is what this data contributes to, where we want to identify the parts of Tucson that are best for native birds and parts that don't have a lot of native birds, and then compare the two and see what we could do to create better habitat for birds, and then encourage people to make those changes in their yards. So like we have, the Gamble's quail card, desert finches, hummingbirds. There's like 10 of them now. They're those rat cards, those 4x9 rat cards that we give out at events. It's it's a great outcome and product that was always envisioned for the Tucson Bird Count and became a reality. I think it's hard for graduate students to do that kind of thing, to create outreach materials that then you give to the public. But a nonprofit like Tucson Audubon and now Tucson Bird Alliance was well situated to do that kind of thing. So we did apply for a few grants. I got a few grants and we made those cards happen. So that was a big end result product of the Tucson Bird Count. And the count continues with this sort of underlying focus always of trying to understand how we can improve urban bird habitat in Tucson. So that's always been a big driver of the count. I just want to point that out there because that can get a little lost, I think, just going through the logistics of the count and like how you do the count and all that. But it has always had this larger conservation purpose, which I think is fun. It's a very cool part of this project, and it makes it very interesting to do and then to look at the data. So we also have a whole urban nest boxes thing we put in here as well. But okay, so I have notes on this, what we're going to go over. Okay, so that's why the count is happening. But I do want to go over a little bit of the actual logistics of the count. So it's very map heavy, as you would imagine, the Tucson bird count. So how this generally works, and let me just turn this, makes it a little easier to see it without this layer, I think, is a counter, a volunteer, will sign up for a route. And as you can see by all these little dots on this interactive map, the count really does focus on urban, the sort of the greater Tucson metropolitan area. So it does include Oro Valley, Marana, Vail, All these areas in the Tucson metro area are within the count. This count was very well designed in 2001, and it's a very interesting thing because it was designed and created in 2001. We've added a lot of modern tools to the TBC over the years, but it still has a lot of that original structure. And I'll show you briefly what I mean by that. The original structure of the count that we've had to like make sure everything is compatible with. And because technology was pretty different in 2001. But you can kind of see here that the dots are spread out throughout the valley. They are, for the most part, pretty evenly spaced. So how it was done was a 1 kilometer grid was placed over the whole valley pretty much, and dots were then placed within those 1 kilometer squares. And there was a huge emphasis on trying to make sure it was as random as possible by still making it publicly accessible, right? So you're not going to put the point count location in the middle of like someone's backyard. It's on the street, right? So they're in publicly accessible locations is the main point. But they're careful. Will was careful to lay it out where they're not like only in the best spots or something, right? So it is a pretty even distribution across the city. You do have clusters sometimes, and those tend to be parks. And we'll talk about that. Parks kind of have their own special status in the Tucson Bird Count. Um, Another important thing to note is that there are some counts that are in the more natural habitat. So the vast majority are in urban Tucson, various levels of urbanization throughout the valley, but some are in the national parks and Tucson Mountain Park. And the reason for that is that Tucson is very interestingly set up, which is very convenient for something like the Tucson Bird Count, where you have a huge amount of urban area, but you also have areas that literally cannot be urbanized, like the national park, which can serve as a bit of a control. So we can compare natural habitat to urban habitat, and some really interesting things actually come out of doing that kind of data analysis. But so that's why some of these counts do include hiking. There's like several in Sabino Canyon. They're in Saguaro East, Saguaro West. There's a few in Tucson Mountain Park, but that's why it's set up this way. It's meant to be a bit of a sort of a control, a comparison over all these years. We can look at that data, and some really interesting things have come out. And sometimes I mean, often you get higher species counts in the urban, which makes sense because there's a lot of more water in the urban. There's people planting native plants, putting up bird feeders, etc. So this is the general layout of the count. I occasionally get requests from people who want to add a route if they live in a different area, like Green Valley,
Off
and that's
slowly,
just not possible since the count is originally set up in Tucson, and it's a long-running data set, so we keep it in Tucson. Okay. All right, so let's see here. So they are organized into routes. And so like, let me show you guys. But you can see these routes, all these little different colors are like a different route, but they do sort of overlap each other. And this was another design of Will's. He was trying to eliminate sort of like kind of spread people out in a way to make sure that, let's say you have someone who's like a phenomenal birder and they're getting more species just because they're like amazing and they have supersonic hearing or something. These roots kind of weave through each other, and this is done on purpose for like a sampling reason. But but when you sign up for a route, it's basically an organized. So this is 129. So this is 129 underscore 12. So there's usually about 10 to 12 points within a route that someone adopts, and it's not a transect or anything. They're point counts. So you would go to those 12 locations along your route and get to the right location, and then you stand there for 5 minutes. And so these are 5 minute point counts. And by point count, I mean that's a really standard bird survey design where you stand on a point for 5 minutes and you survey. It's sort of like a measure, a sample of time in a very specific location where you record all the birds you're seeing and hearing at any distance. There's no limit to the distance in this particular survey. At any distance, all the birds you see and hear within a 5 minute time are recorded, and then you go to the next count. A few things I do want to point out is that we do have some transects. There are some transects in the count. They're definitely grandfathered in. I try not to do transects at all on any new areas that I've set up over the years. But there's been a few of these areas that were done as transects way back in the day from previous counters, and we continue to do those just to keep sort of the data consistent. But the people who have those know about that and have done them for many, many years and know what they're doing. But generally, I don't want to like say exclusively, but for the most part, these counts are point counts, 5 minute point counts. Another thing I do want to point out is that this 129, so any count route name in the 100 series. And what I mean by that is like everything from 101. Oh, I saw a question. What's the definition of transect? A transect's different from a point count in that a transect is more a measure of space where you walk a particular route. It's usually like a trail or a path or like the edge of a wash or something. And you walk, let's say, and it's usually will have a set start and end. All of ours are less than a kilometer, considerably less than a kilometer. I think they're in the sort of 500-meter range, where you walk a particular distance and the amount of time isn't necessarily set, but the distance is. And you record all the birds you detect from point A to point B is a transect. Whereas a point count is you stand on the same location, record your start time and your end time, and it has to be 5 minutes. So it's just different in what they're sampling. A transect is sampling a distance, like a route, and a point count is staying in a particular location and doing exactly 5 minutes. That's the difference between a point count and a transect. And a point count is recording at this exact location for 5 minutes in the spring, I had these birds. And so when a data set gets really historic, like this one began in 2001, that's a very long data set. Um, when that happens, you get quite a robust data set that you can compare over time. And that is quite important thing to cover as well, is that these points generally have stayed the same. They've had to move for some reasons, and we'll talk about that, but we generally keep them as consistent as possible. And the spring count happens April 15 to May 15. And this can be done, and this is another really important detail for beginners for the Tucson Bird Count, is when you sign up for a route, let's say this one here, like let's just click on this blue one here. If you sign up for route 107 and you have, the 12 points within it, and I'll show you too. I have maps that show just one route at a time. Don't worry, I have those. You will do those points any date between April 15 to May 15 that's convenient for you. I suggest you maybe check the weather or whatever works for you, for your schedule. If you're like, ooh, the next Wednesday is going to be particularly less hot, I'm going to do it on that day. Whatever you want to do, they do need to be done in the morning. And also, a very important detail that I think can make it more convenient for people is the count does not, your route does not have to be completed all in one morning. If you want to do, 4 points one morning and then, 6 points another morning, that is totally fine. If it's no problem at all, because these are point counts, each point when you do it kind of operates as its own little independent survey, and they're organized into a route sort of for people's, for the, I guess for just the design of the count. Where I signed up for this route, they also are set up really interestingly where many of the routes will contain points that maybe are, how do I say, less desirable from a birding point of view, because it might be very, very urban. And you're like, okay, well, I stood here for 5 minutes and all I saw was 20 pigeons. That's incredibly important data for the count to know that there's zones, and sometimes zones even where people get zero birds can happen, a particular point count. That is cannot be the most interesting thing. It's not the most interesting 5 minutes of your life, but it is vital data to know that there are these dead zones throughout the city, or, zones where you don't have any native birds, but only non-native species, or very few native birds. But these were well thought out, and I can't think of a single route where all the points are like that. They're usually woven through where they take you and, you do a count, maybe do a point like that where all you get is a couple of house sparrows or something. And then maybe the next point would be in a much more sort of lush area where you might get more birds. So these things have changed over time, but urban Tucson has really changed since 2001. But just so you know, that's how they're organized. And so the 100 series are these spring counts that only happen once a year, and they happen from April 15 to May 15, any morning of your choice. You can divide a route up over multiple mornings if you would like. And then we have our 500 series, and 500 series are parks. We call them parks. They are not exclusively within parks. Like there's a few, I think there's at least one, maybe two on U of A campus, which isn't like a park, but from a bird's point of view, it's a bit like a park where it's very um, watered and, very large piece of habitat. It's kind of the main idea. Okay, so here's one. Rio Vista Park is a park count. And oh, come on, this map. I'm on the good internet. I don't know why it's being a little slow. Okay, so here's Rio Vista Park. And these are always in what we call the 500 series. So this is 527.03. So there's a few point counts within this park area. You'll occasionally, what would be interesting too is there's probably very close by some spring count points as well. And sometimes even within the park. Some of this 100 series, once a year counts, will sometimes have a point or two within a park as well. Again, sort of just increasing our sampling. But the main difference between parks, the 500 series and the 100 series, and this is just how it was set up in 2001, is that the park counts, the goal is to do those quarterly. So they are a bit of a different commitment in that they happen 4 times a year. And it's the same idea where it's a month span. So, like the summer count is July 1 to July 31, the fall count is October 1 to October 31. So, and I do send reminders out for those for the people who have signed up to do a park count. And they're supposed to happen quarterly just to get a little more data in our system and for different times of year as well. But the big push, the vast majority of this count happens in the spring. So that's an important distinction, and just so people understand what they're signing up for. There are also a few routes that are in the 900 series, and I don't know why they were named that way originally, but they are all very natural habitat counts, kind of hiking counts. They're mostly in like Sabino Canyon and Saguaro National Park, and I think that was the original idea. It's like, oh, these will be our hiking counts, I guess. But there are a few in the 900 series, and I always point that out when they're available. Like, this is a hiking route. You have to have a GPS. They're not the A nice thing about these urban locations is many of them are like you can literally pin it to an address. It's like, okay, this is the address, stand on the curb in front of this particular address, makes it a different way to find it. But these ones along trails and like Sabino Canyon have to be kind of done with a GPS. Now, smartphones have come along, which has made that a lot more simple. Back in the day, we had to do that with actual GPS units. So technology's really changed, but in a good way, I think. All right, so I do want to just check my notes real quick here. Okay, so let's see. I think I want to ask if anybody has any questions right now about this, about the basic logistics of the count, of the fact that, okay, we already answered the question in the chat. All right. If anyone has a question, go ahead and put it in the chat and I'll watch for that. But so yeah, the basic logistics of the count is you sign up for a route or more than one route if you would like, and then you do it any morning of your choice, April 15 to May 15. And the reason it doesn't start earlier, that's a question I get a lot, is why doesn't it start earlier when it's cooler, when the weather is a bit nicer? And the main reason for that is that spring migration doesn't actually start in Southeast Arizona until usually mid-April. I mean, for sure. It can start a bit earlier in some years, and you certainly has plenty of spring activity from our resident birds. So things like verdants and cactus wrens that don't leave the area that are here year round, they start getting ready to nest before April 15th. They start like in March, and some of the hummingbirds will start as early as January. But those are resident birds, and the Tucson Bird Count, to try to capture both resident bird activity and migrant bird activity, doesn't start till April 15, and that's when migration for sure is usually underway. And I think it was a bit late this year. It felt late to me being out there, and that I even was thinking to myself, this is exactly why the count needs to be within the spring section, is because of that. And some years the migration can start a little later, but it's almost always underway by April 15th. Okay, so we have a question here. Do the instructions specify what time window in the AM is used for the protocol? Yes, and I think it's 5 hours after sunrise. So anywhere between sunrise and 5 hours after sunrise is the acceptable window of doing the count. That's a really sort of standard bird survey protocol, is up to 5 hours after sunrise. And I mean, this time of year, sunrise is going to be before 6 o'clock. So I would suggest not going all the way to 5 hours after, unless it's a particularly cool day, just for everyone's sort of health and safety, because it can get a little warm in late April into early May by, 10 a.m. But theoretically, you could go as late as, 9:30, whatever 5 hours after sunrise is that day. So yes, it's always in the morning. And that's why I think splitting up the routes works really well for a lot of people, because it can be hard to get like the whole route in the early morning hours when it's still nice and cool and nice and with lots of bird activity. So splitting up the route is a good idea. You certainly don't have to, but I just want everyone to really understand that that is an option for people. Okay. So I did want to talk about a few of the things I do make available to counters. And like, so for instance, I do have this album of images. They're 8.5 by 11 maps for each route. Okay. So I used to like email these to people, and I've tried really trying to modernize the count a bit and make it less like sort of like clunky in people's email boxes. So we've made a few additions over the years, which is I think after all these years now, we're in a pretty nice position of sort of convenient stuff. But anyway, there's this album online showing and sometimes I do end up emailing to people too, but which I certainly can if you would like. But so let's look at Route 104 here. And this is a map showing just exactly where, only without all the clutter of all the other points, where your points are for this particular route. So I do have this album of particular maps, and you can see they're all here, and like you can see some are quite different. So here's 118, and this one is way up on, this is Ina, and I think this is up on the northwest side. And you can see some of these routes are like in the natural habitat, and then some are in more of the urban area. So anyway, we do have these available for everyone. They're individual maps, and then of course we have our online map where you can just search. If you're like, oh, I'm doing route, 104, it will pull out all the 104 points. And so you can do that. You have both an interactive one where you can like zoom in, you can change the background base map to be, satellite photography instead of more of a traditional map. Anyway, so I do offer both for people where you have both sort of more traditional static maps, which is how the count originally worked with just these sorts of maps, and then an online Google map that you can zoom in and see all the points. All right, so another thing that has changed over time is that the Tucson Bird Count website always had a data entry portal that you would click here. And I have it listed here on this tab on the Tucson Bird Count website, results in data entry. Go to data entry, click here, and that takes you to a more traditional, more like you would expect from 2001 kind of technology website that you put in your first name, last name, and email. Now, how this works, I do want to point this out, and this might be something that even existing counters may not be super aware of, is that how the Tucson Bird Count is set up logistically from my point of view as a coordinator is the whole thing is within an Access database. And anyone who's ever dealt with an Access database knows what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, this is just really interesting software, very robust, not the most user-friendly software, but very stable, helpful software that Microsoft put out ages ago and was around in 2001 and is still around. And how this works is tables. They look sort of like Excel tables, but they're not, and they all link together. Okay, I don't want to get too much into the weeds in this, but basically the Tucson Bird Count is structured out of an Access database. And the information, the exact way your name and email is recorded in this database that I maintain is exactly what has to happen for your login. Now, this is only if you are using the original, more traditional login online data entry interface that we've had since 2001. We have a new option, which is eBird. But I just want to show this real quick in case for those who want to do the online way of doing it. And I know some people still do. I have people who've been doing this count for many years. So once you put in exactly as I have it in the database, I don't think capitalization matters, but the spelling is what matters. Your first name, your last name, and whatever email I have in that table is what is going to be your login. Okay, so if it's not working for you, let me know, and we'll have to. I can tell you what the database says, or I can swap it out for what you would prefer it to be. But if something happens where I spelled your name wrong, or it's your old email or something that I have in the database table, it won't log in correctly. So you have to put in your first name, last name, email, and then once you're logged in, it shows your route. Some people have multiple routes that they have adopted, and then they would be listed down here. So there's a enter observations button that you click. Come on, internet. If I previously logged in. Okay. The login not on here. I had pre-logged in for the meeting, and of course it expired. Okay, that's what it looks like. Okay. So when you've logged in, hit enter observations, and this is what it looks like. You So as you can see, it looks like a web page from that we've updated. We did update this in maybe 2013, but it definitely looks like HTML because that's what it is. And you pick your site. So this is all the ones associated with this route. And then the count period, which actually I need to add spring, but spring doesn't start till tomorrow. So it'd be 2025 spring. You add that in. You select which one. It is a point count, the name of the counter, which should default to the last one you put in. So when the first time you do it, it does take a little more setup. You have to go and find your name from the list of people. If you have another observer, it is fine to do these surveys in pairs, or even I have a few of these surveys that are done in small groups. That is totally fine. Just go ahead and enter their names, just so we have track of who helped, and because we do thank yous and stuff for people. The date, the time, the status, and then you create a visit. So I'm going to create one, and then I'll have to go back and delete this later. So I'm going to put in whatever time it was, the date and time. I'm going to say test, delete, so I remember to delete this later. And then you create a visit. And I think this does a good job kind of like leading you along. This web page does. And now I've created a visit. So for this point count, for this date and time, I can start putting in birds. So you go down to your birds. If you start typing the words, like great blue heron, it starts showing it jumps to it as you start typing. It's actually pretty good. So I had one bird, I had one great blue heron. Now this supplemental concept is there for, and the protocol explains this. This is for birds that are extra. You can think of supplemental as like extra birds. So they're either birds that happen before or after you started the 5 minute point count, or they can be birds that you detected in between points. But irregardless, they're extra. They're not at that point, or they're not within the 5 minute span. Okay. Now the reason we give people this option is one, it can create interesting data because it's just the worst when the 5 minutes pings and then a really interesting bird flies by. You can still record it, it's just supplemental. So if I had one on the count and then one happened right after, I can just do one and one. Or if I didn't have one during the 5 minutes, I can do zero and one. And let's say I saw one going to the next point. You can still record that as a supplemental bird. So then you add this species to the count and you keep doing that, and it shows it for you. So it does show you that it logged that bird. Now, the way access works, anyone who's dealt with anything we do with IBA databases will be familiar with this concept. But once it shows it for you, it's logged. So it's not like you, in more modern stuff, you'd think like you've started entering birds in an eBird checklist and then you walk away and I don't know, refreshes or something and you lost all that work. Access databases don't work that way. Once you've entered a bird survey point, like once you've entered like a bird and it shows that it's logged, it shows it to you, back to you, it's in. Okay. So then after you're done entering all your birds, you hit done with this visit and it'll take you back to this page where you can then enter observations and then choose the next point count location. So I'm going to do a more detailed video on this, but I just wanted to just briefly show that we do have this online interface that is sort of back in the day, the only way Tucson Bird Count data was entered. And we still make it available. We still maintain it. It's still there. Some people still use it. But these days, the vast majority of our counters are using eBird. This has been a total like revolutionary change for the count. And I think it's made it a lot easier for a lot of people because how this one works, our online system, how it works was you had to use paper data forms, record your birds in the field, which if you prefer that, that is totally fine. I have a total outlet for you to do it this way. And I have a data form on the website that people can download and print out and use. Uh, that used to be the only option. Now we have two options. So if people still want to do paper data forms, that's fine. It's totally fine. And then go in and enter the data on their computer later. That's totally fine. The count, because it started in 2001 and everything was so different, we used to ask people to send us the paper data forms. I'm going to make that entirely optional from now on, where if people want to, that's fine. I do archive them. But I am not going to in any way require people sending paper data forms anymore since so many people now use the count through eBird. And they're not using a paper data form because eBird has this smartphone interface where you can do counts, do like checklists from your phone, and there is no paper generated or needed. That I'm not going to require that anymore. So just so everyone knows, I know a few people who will probably see this video do still send me their paper data forms, and that's fine. I do archive them. So if you want to keep doing that, that's no problem. But I'm not going to require that sort of extra step any longer. All right, so this is how the online system works. I also just want to briefly show that I do send out protocols and documents to everyone. So here's what we call the Dear Participant Letter. And the way this is set up goes back to 2001, but it just sort of goes over a lot of what we just talked about, the real general information about the count. We also have a thing I've added over the last few years about entering your volunteer hours. This is something that is explained in the letter. I do know who is doing the count through my database, so I kind of keep track that way as well. But if you are already entering volunteer hours for Tucson Bird Alliance or Tucson Audubon Society, we do have a way that you can enter your volunteer hours. Anyway, so that's a real in the weeds, but that is something we do collect. And then I also have this other document I send out to everybody, which is like the instructions document, and it talks about what you need, the fact you need binoculars, etc. Acceptable weather, counting birds, temporary noise and interruption. So real sort of in the weeds kind of directions and a little bit of what we just talked about, how you submit your data, etc. So this year we'll have quite a lot of updates of what I just said, that we're not going to be collecting paper data forms anymore, etc. But just so you know, this does go out to everyone. So if you're volunteering for the count, you do get that kind of info. And then, of course, links to things like the access to these albums. So I have it restricted to just those in the count. So if you're a new counter, you'll be given access to this online album that has all the route maps in it. And then I do want to talk a little bit about how the eBird works. So just a real brief side note. The Tucson Bird Count is operating off that access database. And when people do their data entry via eBird, it is not going directly into that database. But once a year, with the help of our tech volunteer, who's very helpful, who's done a lot of work on this, we have a tool in this database, in this computer that I'm sort of logging into. There's a separate server system. It's like a big old computer system. Not old. It's not a laptop though. It's a server. It's just quite new. We have a new one down there that has been swapped into. That is down in the Tucson Audubon Nature Shop that all of this comes out of. So all this online data entry, all of it is interfacing with that server that lives downstairs in the nature shop that I then use a remote login to get into. Anyway, all the data, in fact, let me just like show it to you guys. All the data that people enter goes into this. But what that means is that data coming into eBird is going into eBird. It's not going directly into this original database system that is counts. Here it is. So like this is when people enter their data. This is where it goes to. It has hundreds of thousands of lines of data. What are we up to? Over a quarter million lines of data is in this database. And what I do is once a year, there's a custom tool that was built on this server that we're seeing right now, and it's the eBird import system. It's real in the weeds. And I want to do a more detailed video on this later because it's actually really cool. But I take everyone's eBird data at least once a year. I try to do it more than once a year, and it imports it. I download it as a Excel file, and it imports it into that database. Okay, so just so you know, there is a system, a mechanism that we use to take people's Tucson bird count data and put it into the database. Okay, so I have a whole page that I send people. This is a protocol on how to do this, so I'm going to just go over it real quick, but I have this all written out. If you are a new counter or you've adopted a new route or something like that for the Tucson bird count, how this works is you tell me, and this whole thing lays it out, that you want to be doing, I want route, I don't know, 126, and I'm going to be doing it on eBird. So then what happens is you give me your eBird username. Okay, and I'm going to do, again, a more detailed video on exactly how you do this. So that's a shorter one that people can watch separately. But what'll happen is I go into, this is not my personal eBird account. This is an eBird account that is set up for the Tucson Bird Count. Okay, so this is you can see here, I just showed the username here. It is Tucson Bird Count. This is the Tucson Bird Count, its own eBird account. And what we did, I got advice from eBird people on how to do this, because now we were doing it kind of early. We started this, let's say 2019, maybe 2018. Anyway, a few years ago, we started, we really went through, I talked to some eBird people, what's the best way to set up a count, a historic count like this in eBird? So what happens is I basically uploaded the entire set of points of locations for the Tucson bird count into this system. So what happens is I have in this eBird account, I have checklists for every Tucson bird count location that just have mourning dove X, and it is set to January 1, 1900, which is what eBird asked us to do. This flags the system. They have their own system set up this way that any checklist that is January 1, 1900 is not a real checklist, that it's a placeholder checklist. And that's why it has this flagged thing, because I did it that way on purpose because they asked me to. So they know it is a placeholder checklist. So what happens is if you tell me you want to do your route on eBird, I take your username, me as the Tucson Bird Count eBird system will share this 1900 checklist with your username. You can see this one went to Jeff. And then what that means is that this is now populated into your account. So you accept this checklist, and there'll be one for each of your point count locations. So if your route 153 has a dozen point count locations, you will get 12 of these lists, and then an extra one for supplementals. Okay, and you accept the list, and what that means then is that when you go to submit a list on your phone or on the computer, when you go to your locations, it will be in there formatted correctly. Okay, so it will be TBC 10506. So that's the idea. It's not to change the checklist that I sent to you that's dated January 1, 1900. That is just being accepted into your account so that it puts properly, correctly into your account the original setup of both the name, TBC, 10506, and the location will be the same. So that's the idea. That's the way that eBird told us to do this, to make it as sort of easy for people as possible and keeping everything as like accurate and organized as possible. Is that you then, and this is very possible on your phone as well, after you do the checklist, it'll ask you what location, and it'll be pulling from your personal locations, and that should show up TBC 10506, and then you do a new checklist based off of that with your correct date. It'd be April 15, 2025. I was stationary, my start time. So then you put in the accurate current information based on that original list that was shared with you. So that's the basic idea. I do sort of go into it in kind of excruciating detail in this form, or excuse me, this the document that I share with everybody. And I am going to do a separate video showing that specifically as a standalone. But that is the idea, is I share a master list with you that then populates into your account that then you then use to create a new checklist. Okay. So that's the idea. And it actually has been working super well. Once people get the hang of it, it's awesome. And then they're in your own account. You can see them. Another really important detail, and anyone who uses eBird a lot will be familiar with this idea, but another really important step is to make sure that so it's been a 5-minute list. Let's say there was two people there, whatever it was, one or two. You can put comments if you would like. And then once you do your list, either on your phone or on the desktop, and it's in the future anyway. Once you're done, anyone who's used eBird a lot or even a little bit knows that you can share checklists, okay, with other people who were there. So you can share the checklist with maybe the other person who was doing the count with you or whatever. But it's very important that you share that checklist. And you can go back. If you forget at the time, it's no problem. You can just go back and do it later. But it's very important that your completed checklists at some point in the season get shared with the username Tucson Bird Count. I make a big deal about this in everyone's like info email and also on this how-to document. But it's really important that it gets shared with username Tucson Bird Count, because that's how I get the data back. That's how I get it back, where then later I can download it and upload it into the Access system. So just so you guys know, there are like a lot of like these background steps that happen with the TBC, and this is what we've had to figure out and do to accommodate a system that was very robustly designed in 2001. This database from 2001 is robust. It's very, very, very well organized, very good. But I have like this whole new world of data entry happening on eBird, but we did figure out a really good way to sort of smash the two together. And the reason we do that is because the Tucson Bird Count, the reason we bother to do that and not just keep the data in eBird or something is because one, we can then go in this Access database and pull huge amounts of data out of it. The Tucson Bird Count data has been used by many graduate students, many studies. Um, Southern Sierra Research Station, who just is involved with the current state of the birds study, had a whole thing about verdins and how they're declining, and a lot of that data came from the Tucson Bird Count. Okay, so that I shared with them. So anyway, it gets used for a lot of different studies, and the way I can do that accurately and keep everything exactly as it should be is this eBird data does get pushed into this a little bit more old-fashioned but very robust Access database. So that is going on in the background, just so you guys know. That's happening with the TBC. That does happen. I usually do it in the winter. I take sort of all the data, download it for the year, and then push it into the Tucson, the Tucson Bird Count Access database. Anyway, so that's what's going on, and that's why it's very important that the list gets shared with Tucson Bird Count. I do send a reminder, sort of at the end of the count period, to do that, but it is important that it happen. Okay, so and if you don't, and you can do it after the fact. You can be like, oh shoot, I didn't share that list. You can go back and do it later. It's fine, and then we still get that data. So I usually download it about once a year, so it's not like I'm just downloading it every week or anything. So don't worry, but it does need to happen sort of by the end of the count period, if possible, so that you remember to share those. Okay. So, and this whole explanation sheet goes into that. So I do want to talk about a few new things that are happening. So that was sort of a basic overview of everything that's happening with TBC right now. I do have a few new things that I want to just talk about quickly. And one of them is, I know this is coming up in people's minds. It's been coming up in my mind, is what do we do about Merlin? Okay. So Merlin, if you're not familiar, it's also from Cornell, the same people who do the eBird system that we use. Merlin is a free app that you can put on your phone that that helps you identify birds by sound. So let me see if I put it by my face, I think it'll work. So Merlin's an app and it's free that you can put on your smartphone. And then you can hit this little microphone button and it'll be listening to birds and telling you what they are as it thinks and understands. Okay, so it's AI. And I have to say it works pretty darn well. Okay, so what to do about Merlin? Merlin was not used in the past because it didn't exist for the TBC. It's a long-running data set. I put a lot of thought into this and I've looked up what other counts are doing and talked to other count coordinators. And what I've decided to do is to not prohibit Merlin. Okay, I suspect people are going to use it anyway. And to try to eliminate bias as much as possible, because if only some people are using Merlin and everyone else thinks they're not allowed to use Merlin, it would create a ton of bias. So what the bird count coordinator community has pretty much decided, and this makes sense to me, is that there's a ton of bias already in bird count stuff. Okay, so some people just have more have better hearing. Some people can just sort of, I don't know. So there's bias anyway. So what we've decided to do is I am not going to prohibit the use of Merlin. It is not required. But if you would like to use it, if you're not feeling as confident or you feel like there's a ton of common birds going off and you might forget to put one of the common birds down, and you want to have Merlin running for that 5 minutes just in case, like, oh, shoot, I forgot to put mourning dove down, that kind of thing. Or if it helps you feel more confident doing the count, you're like, okay, that call I didn't realize that was an alternate call of Phainopepla or whatever. I am not going to prohibit it. I don't require it, but if you would like to use it, that is fine. Okay, so that's I want to make sure everyone's on the same page about that to eliminate sort of bias as much as possible. It's optional, but it is allowed. Okay, and I will be adding that to the protocol document as well. So that's just the first year it's really sort of like come up in my own head is like, oh, Merlin's now actually really good. So people are probably going to want to use it, and I don't want to ban it. Okay, so just so you guys know, that is optional. Another thing that has come up a lot, I did have this in the protocol document last year, but I do want to bring it up now because I'm sure many of us will encounter it. Tucson has been changing quite a lot. Urban Tucson itself has been changing a lot. And more I hear from people that they're having trouble accessing a point count location that having no problem for 25 years, suddenly I can't get to it because now it's usually the problem is it's become a gated community. Sometimes the problem is something temporary like construction. That definitely happens is construction. In which case, if it's something temporary like that, just go ahead and skip the location if you can't get to it. If it's a sort of thing where it won't be a problem in the future, like construction, we had a lot of this on those point counts along like Ina Road or near I-10, where literally you couldn't get to them. That's fine. Just go ahead and skip it for the year. But if it's something where it's become a permanent problem, like now it's behind a gated community, this is happening more and more in certain parts of the city. We are going to then, in the field, and I have a protocol for this, but in the field, you are going to retire that count location. It's just gone. Okay. You just skip it and then let me know that you can't get to it anymore, and I will go in the system and like retire it. There's a something in the database I can do to retire that count, and then you're gonna have to in the field, if possible, we can just retire it if we need to, but if possible, I want you to create a new one nearby. Like let's say there's suddenly now the point is pretty close, and now it's a gated community, and you can't get in. You can do it from outside the gate. Or if you're looking at, Google Maps on your phone and you're like, man, I could go one street over and I can get to that. And it's kind of similar habitat. Just make a new point count. And how we're going to do that is you're going to do the point in on your eBird map or eBird app or on your paper or whatever. But somehow we do need coordinates for the new location you've just created. And then you have to get that to me and I'll create a new count. It's not going to be replacing, let's say it was like Route 101 point count, underscore '05, which means it's like point count 5 of Route 101. Oh, I can't get to it. I need to make a new one that's, the goal is to try to get it within a kilometer. That's not always possible, but do the best you can. Um, you're not going to name it 105 again, even though it's sort of replacing 105. You're going to just give it a new name that's in the series. So if that route, the last point count is 12 underscore 12, this one's going to be now 13. Okay, the new one will have the next number in the series, and that's going to be the replacement location. I hope that makes sense. It's been more and more of a problem. And rather than have people have to try to go out, like I go on the computer and pick a new location, they have to like do it again. If you can't get to a point and it's a permanent problem, like no trespassing signs come up, or now it's behind a gated community, whatever, or it's for whatever reason, it's just no longer publicly accessible. We're just gonna go as close as you can and make a new point, or just retire it completely. We can do that too. Okay. So I just want to point that out there. This has been happening more and more, and that's how we're going to be handling it. Okay. So the last thing I want to cover is this new habitat component. And I want to share a little bit about why we're doing it. So when Rachel McCaffrey ran the count for years, she did her PhD on the Tucson Bird Count, and I read her PhD about 2 years ago. I looked through her whole document. It was very, very interesting. And I've been in contact with Rachel over the years anyway, but what really struck me was what she did with the TBC data was so interesting. And I was reading her thesis, and from 2004 to 2006, she did a habitat component on the survey where I think she must have just done it herself with maybe a help from a few people. She went to pretty much all of the point count locations, and there's like 900 point count locations total. She went to I think with the help of a few maybe some undergrads, went to all those locations and she did a basic habitat assessment. And then she used that to then look at the data. So a lot of these conclusions that have been drawn over the years, like the value with like numerical data, the value of cholla for cactus wrens, that kind of thing. And that's actually why I was looking at her thesis. I was writing an article about cactus wrens, and I went and looked at the data and her conclusions. And I was reading this and her methods, and I thought, oh my gosh, she did a habitat assessment from 2004 to 2006. So she spent several years to hit them all. She didn't hit them all in 1 year. It's a lot of point counts. And I thought, wouldn't it be great, since we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary of that, for us to do a habitat assessment on the same points and compare the bird data to how these sites have changed over time. So that's the point of it. That's why we're doing it. But and I worked with Rachel. Rachel's been great, even though she now like still lives in Albuquerque and doesn't do the Tucson Bird Count at all anymore. Has been super helpful, and she went and polled her original, because it wasn't super obvious in the her dissertation. She went and told me, pulled from her old files the questions that she did on her original assessment for the Tucson Bird Count. So now here we are 20 years later, and we are, and this is optional. You don't have to do this, but we're trying to do it. I also have a few people who are interested in doing this for routes where it doesn't get done, right? So this doesn't have to happen on the same morning as your count. You certainly can do it the same morning. I mean, you're already there, so that's what I would do. And it's only 11 questions. And I think once you get the hang of it, it'll be fairly just take a couple minutes after your count at that location to sort of look around and assess. And this is just based on what you can see. You don't have to be looking over people's fences, nothing like that. Just you visually, as a counter standing on this location, what are you seeing? Okay. And I have this on a paper form, but I also have created an online Google form that can then be shared with everyone, and you can do it on your phone directly if you'd like digitally. But I do have it as a paper form that you can just have with you in the field. And that's how I've been doing it as a paper form, and I find it pretty easy that way. And then you can just bring it back later and enter it on the computer. Again, I'm going to do a standalone video on this that I'm going to do outside at an actual site and go through the process. So I'm going to do a more detailed standalone video. But I just want people to understand the basic idea of why we're doing this. It's so that we can then do another analysis of this data 20 years later, assess how points have changed based on Rachel's data from 2004 to 2006. Now we're on to some people did this last year for us as a pilot study. So then compare that data to the 2024 to 2026 data. So we'll be working on this next year as well. So if it feels like too much, if this is your first year doing the count and you're like, I don't want to do this right now, that's totally fine. We're going to have the option for people to do it later in the spring or on a different day, or some people who aren't available for the count want to hit some of these without doing a bird count, just doing the data assessments on some of these points. I have some people doing that. And it can also just happen next year as well. Okay, so just it's not. I don't want to like put a ton of pressure on people to do this, but it's I think a really interesting, fun thing that we're going to try to do to then look at this data in a really more meaningful way and try to understand how Tucson has changed based on Rachel's data to our habitat data, and then how the birds have responded. So it's going to be really interesting. And it asks questions like, do you see mistletoe in any of the trees within 40 meters? These measurements are kind of weird, but this is how Rachel did it in 20 years ago. So we're using the same metrics. Okay, so basically, do you see 40 meters is pretty far. So it basically is mistletoe within sight because I mean 50 meters is it's hard to detect birds beyond that. So basically, nearby, within 40 meters, do you see mistletoe? How many thorn trees do you see? Over 2 meters tall, approximately 6 feet. So you can kind of see where this is going. How many cholla cacti over 1 meter or 3 feet are present, basically within 40 meters? How many saguaros over 2 meters tall? How many palm trees? So you can see what's happening. We're trying to look for correlations. Rachel was trying to see correlations between certain plant presences and birds present. And then do you see bird feeders? You can see how that could really influence data. Is there water present, such as a fountain or bird bath, just as far as you can detect standing there doing the count or just standing there doing a habitat assessment? Do I hear or see water? And then approximately how many houses are within, well, let's just say 40 meters. 40 meters or 130 feet. And how many large trees over 5 meters? That's just any type of tree. And then within 40 meters, how would you generally classify the vegetation? Is it primarily native, a mix of native and exotic, primarily exotic, or none of these? And then I have this last one, which I added, which is please take a photo of the site that you feel represents the habitat. And it can be multiple pics. And I had some people do this last year. They did a great job. The photos looked awesome. And what we're going to do then is use those photos to classify on our end what the habitat looks like. It also gives us a chance if there's any other component that seems important, like is the road paved, etc. We can get that from the photos. We're also going to be doing a urbanization, sort of like how densely urban the area is, the point is. But that is not something that you can really do on the ground. That happens with satellite imagery. So we'll be doing that sort of remotely later. Sounds like a great intern job. So we'll be doing that later. But anyway, that's what's going on. I did create a online version where the data can be entered either just from a paper form later at your computer or in the field even. These Google surveys are possible to do from a smartphone. So anyway, that's what's going on with the habitat assessment and why it is important. So I will also have this online form, and vitally what it does is gives you an area to drop a photo. Okay, actually, let me show you what it looks like from a user end. That's what it looks like from. So you do the date of the survey, you hit next. Come on, why isn't it working? Should have tested it. Oh, because it wants the information. Okay, you have to give it the stuff that, yeah. All right. All right. So then you go through, you tell what site it is, and then the questions are here for each site. And then it has this place you can drop a photo or more than one photo. I have it set to accept up to 10 photos, but you can just do one if you'd like, or if you just take them on your phone, a few photos, maybe, all four directions if you would like, or just a couple directions, wherever you think captures the essence of what's going on at that point count location. Okay, so that's the idea, is to answer these sort of 11 questions, and they're pretty simple. I think hopefully they're pretty simple. And then drop a photo. Okay, so that's the idea for that. Another thing I'm doing, and this is new for this year, and we're gonna, and I'll shoot, we're a little past 11. Okay, but what I realized when I wrote an article on the Tucson Bird Count, um, I don't know, like a year ago, that I don't have any photos from Tucson Bird Count people, and I've never made it I've never even like mentioned it that this is something we can do. And what I mean is, I don't mean habitat photos. I mean photos of people like doing the count. So some of my other projects, we make a big deal about this, where we have albums of like people doing alfalfa surveys or whatever. So I've created an album, and I'll share this with everybody. And this is entirely optional, but I do want everyone to know that you can that I encourage people, if you're comfortable doing it, to take photos either of like selfies, or maybe if you're taking another person in the field, them holding the clipboard or whatever. Just fun sort of action shots of doing the Tucson bird count. And if you would want to submit them, it'll only sort of be available to other counters. And then if I do want to use any for an article or anything, I would ask your permission and give you credit. But anyway, so I these Google albums require you to use a photo to start it. This is not the Tucson bird count. This is two people birding in Britain. But anyway, what's going on is I will share this with everybody, and we will have a Google album where people can submit photos from the field, just sort of fun photos of you guys doing the count or whatever. Okay. And also looking at my notes here, there is something important I forgot to mention. And thinking of photos made me think of it. This is an urban count. This is happening in like neighborhoods and parks and sidewalks. And sometimes people get kind of weirded out when they see you standing out there with binoculars and you're looking at birds, but people are like, so I have had situations, and to try to mitigate any of these problems, just so you know, for everyone's knowledge, I do every year inform local law enforcement that this count is happening, that it's this time span of this count. And if anything goes wrong and this does not happen, it happens once every few years at the most. I mean, it doesn't happen a lot. And I don't know why, but it's mostly happened in Oro Valley. I don't know. Okay. So I definitely always let Oro Valley police know. But if anything happens and you're like approached by law enforcement, like, what are you doing? You can just say, I'm doing the Tucson Bird Count. It's with Tucson Bird Alliance. The coordinator is Jenny McFarland. Here's her cell phone number. So I do include my cell phone number on all of the um, sort of protocols and everything. It's also in my email signature. And that has happened once where I did get a phone call from a counter. It was like, oh, I'm here with Oro Valley Police. Can you confirm with them that I'm doing a bird count? And I talked to the officer and everything was fine. And also helped that I had called Oro Valley Police and they knew about the count. So that was fine. But I just want to put that out there. It hardly ever happens. But one of the reasons that one of the links that gets included in your sort of info packet is a sign that says bird count in progress with the Tucson bird count logo. The reason we've always done that, the original counters were doing that from 2001, is it's something to put in your dashboard. So if anything happens, you get approached, it's something official you can show people like, oh no, I'm doing this bird count. Here's a logo, here's a sign, whatever. Anyway, so that's why that is still included in your packet, is a link to a PDF you can print out of a Tucson bird count sign. If you don't have a printer at home, I can print it for you and you can pick it up at the nature shop, whatever. But anyway, that is a thing I just want to mention. And I had one more thing I wanted to mention. Look at my notes. Okay. Right. Okay. One more thing. Available routes. I am very careful about making a route available that was not previously available. Some of my counters have been doing this count. I have a few left still that have been doing it for over 20 years. Okay, since pretty much the beginning. I have a few people still in there. So when people retire from the count, whatever routes become available, I do try to be really careful about making those routes up for grabs because sometimes people don't, maybe they're not available that year or whatever, but it's a count they've done for like 20 years and they don't want to lose their route. I am being very careful. I'm updating my list of available routes, and I will have that ready for anyone who's waiting to see whether they got a route that they emailed me about or want to see the list of available routes, which I know many of you are. I will have that ready later today, but I do try to be so careful about taking routes away from somebody or just making sure they actually want to let it go before I make it available, because then sometimes it's not available again for years. So anyway, the updated map of available routes will be available later today. But let's see. If I stop sharing? I'm not sharing, am I? Okay. I would like to. Oh, I know we're a little past time, but I want to open this up for questions. Oh, I see lots of chat stuff. Do we start a new eBird at each point? Yes. So the question here from Tessa, yes, you are going to start a new 5-minute eBird stationary checklist for each of the points. Now, one of the locations, if you're doing this in eBird does not accommodate supplementals in the same way the original TBC system accommodates them. So if you're doing it through our original paper form and online data system, you can just record supplementals right on the data form and then enter them like I showed you where it has two boxes to put them in. eBird does not accommodate that. So what we figured out back in the day is there is every person who signs up for a route from eBird, let's say it's Route 101, you get the 12 original 1900 January 1 lists shared with you, and then you get an extra one that is the supplemental location. And that is for if you are getting, you can keep that one running the whole time, or just sort of any birds you encounter along the way all get dumped into that supplemental location list. But for the actual 5-minute point count locations, the actual surveys, each one needs to be a separate checklist. Yes, that is a very good question. Um, and this is a good example of trying to understand that eBird and the original TBC system are not entirely compatible. And this is one of the biggest incompatibilities is the supplemental idea. So how we fixed it was it's its own separate checklist, and you can just dump them all in if you want, or you can make separate ones, whatever. But if you like sort of if you're just keeping track of the birds you get that are supplemental, you can put them all in one list, um, or you can do separate lists, whatever you'd like. So yeah, okay, let's see here. How do we link and ID each point on eBird? So that is going to be based off the master list I share, the master, not list, oh my gosh, the master point count location, like checklists that I share with you, which then incorporate those locations into your account. And then you can use that to generate new lists. Okay, so that's the idea there. And I will do a very, very detailed video on that and make that available to everybody. Are we given GPS coordinates for each point? Yes. So that is something everyone gets is like a little table of these are your point count locations, the X, Y coordinates. I think my tables are both they're definitely in decimal degrees and they're also in UTMs, which is another format, but they're interchangeable. You do get a table of all of your locations, the coordinates, and then a site description. Okay, so it'll be like in front of this address, make sure you turn around at the cul-de-sac or whatever. So we do that. You do get a table of all of your locations. Can you share a windshield packet that says Tucson Bird Count? Yes, I have one already ready to go, and that is every year has been shared with counters and will be. Let's see here. I'm interested in helping with the habitat assessment, both in surveying points as well as with data entry. Good. Okay, that's great. Anyone who wants to do habitat assessments at their route and is interested at doing it at other routes, I will have that available. That will be a total option for people who don't want to do it or feel overwhelmed by doing it, or just ones that didn't get done or whatever. We will have that available. And then data entry, if anyone wants to just submit paper forms to me, that's fine. And then we can do the data entry. So if anyone wants to help with that, that's great. Or yeah, the fact I have an online data entry now for people to go ahead and do that. And then is the 40 meters a radius from the point? Yes. So that's correct. So the question is 40, the habitat assessment mentioned how many thorn trees within 40 meters is an example. That is a radius, and that is 40 meters from your location in all directions is the idea there. That is correct. Not the diameter. Trying to assess the diameter of an area would be like so visually difficult, but yeah, for 40 meters that way, that way, that way, in all directions. And then let's see. Okay, let's see. And we got a few more questions. When the updated list available is available, um, yes, just email me and I'll say that. Just let me know which ones you want and I will keep that map as updated as possible throughout the day where I can because it's a Google online map, I can delete points off it very easily. So as routes get adopted, I will just remove them from the map so people don't misunderstand what's still available. Okay. And I'm about to add a lot of routes. Okay. So we've had several people retire from the count this year. It has been 25 years since the count started. So we've had quite a few people retire. And I have a lot of routes available that are not on the map yet, but will be later today. And I will let everyone know when that map is updated. Okay. I'll send a group email out to everyone who has indicated to me either existing counters that are looking to either swap routes or pick up a new route and for all the new counters. So everyone will find out at the same time that the map's been updated and just email me back that, oh, I want that route. I want that route. Okay. So I'll assign them and then your um, info email will go out to you with a lot of this information we talked about on the meeting, a link to this video, as well as things like a link to those direction pages, the placard. A lot of these things are already linked to on the website, like the sign saying Tucson Bird Count counter counting in progress. Um, all that will be sent to you, as well as the link to the like how to do the eBird, and it gets to be a bit much, but in terms of just all the different components. But once you get the hang of this count, I think it's really a very doable count. It's just when you're brand new to the account, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. But once you're set up in eBird, it's real easy to keep doing it. The habitat assessments are just going to be once. We're not doing them year after year. We just want to try to hit every route and point within a 3 year span, like Rachel did 20 years ago, is what we're trying to do. We're not trying to do this every year or anything. Um, yeah, so I hope that makes sense. Does anyone have any final questions? I apologize for going over time, but okay. And my cell number is in the footer of my email. Put it in the materials as well. So you can either text me or call me with a question. If you're out in the field and you're like, oh, what's going on? If something happens, text me or call me. That's totally, I encourage that. I'm happy to talk with people and answer any questions. Let me make sure I don't have any more final things in the chat. Um, any other questions or anything on this? Okay. So there'll be a few more shorter videos, pullouts. You don't have to watch the whole thing if you don't want, on how to do the eBird and how to do the habitat assessment. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys joining me this morning. And this will be available online pretty soon, probably in the next hour. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. And I really, really appreciate it.